Hello, and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook. And this week we've got special guest, Attorney Kelli Blackburn. The topic for today's podcast is know that the family court isn't a management tool.
That's right.
Not a management tool. This is not something that you want to jump into. And, you know, we've talked about this a little bit in previous podcasts, but I thought this week I really wanted to bring in a perspective of an attorney on this, because your attorney is the person that's running up your bill. Your attorney is the person that's running the show and keeping things tracking. And I think it's important to know that there's other ways to get through this without depending on the family court to get it done. So, Kelli, what are your thoughts just to lead this off?
So, yeah, Brooke, a couple of things just right off the top. You know, you really have to understand that running into family court, whether you have an established case or you don't, really puts at issue your family for the family court. And so the family court, from your request for them to make orders, maybe on a simple issue, could make orders that you're very dissatisfied with. And once you put custody and visitation at issue for the family court to make orders under, you really have submitted to the jurisdiction of family court to make orders for anything that they see fit in the best interest of your child. So the issue in kind of really pre-litigation is what we're talking about here. Whether you have an established case and you're at a crossroads of whether or not to return to court, or you don't have an established case and you're at a crossroads of whether to even start the process of court. And what we're really talking about is kind of those simple things, those, small issues that your co-parent might do that irritate you or that are not in the best interest of your child, but they're not the issues that necessarily are going to warrant you running into court and asking for the relief or the help of the court. So when we discuss how family court isn't a management tool for your family, what we mean is the family court can't manage your family on the level that you might want them to. The family court isn't going to come in for every missed soccer game, every missed gymnastics tournament, every missed horse show, every missed, equestrian ride. The family court is not going to come in and admonish the parent on a basic level for every single time that happens. Nor are they going to admonish a co-parent if you're not getting your FaceTime calls or your, telephone calls. This is obviously less so depending on what the order says. If the order says something along the lines of, reasonable visitation, reasonable FaceTime, reasonable telephone contact, insisting on a daytime phone call on your schedule is not necessarily going to be something that the family court cares about when the other parent says, no, thank you.
I hate that type of an order when I see them come out. Who decides what reasonable is? And, I want to just come back and ring a quick bell that you opened with here, Kelli. And what I heard you say is every time you step into a courtroom, it's a bit of a crapshoot. Exactly.
And you really don't know what you're going to get. And the best you can do is go in prepared with an attorney, go in prepared with a game plan. When we talk about what's a reasonable order, if you look at your family dynamic, if you guys could agree on what reasonable meant, if the two of you could sit down as co-parents and agree on what was reasonable, you guys wouldn't be in family court. And so the idea that the family court then cuts an order that leaves it up to you to decide what's reasonable, well, what's reasonable isn't necessarily going to be something that either one of you guys can agree on. And so that is kind of a futile court order, but thinking that the family court is going to manage your family on such a minute level to come in and, admonish one parent's bad behavior because of a reasonable telephone schedule or because, they're not getting the kids to every practice, every game, every sporting event. It's kind of it's a pipe dream. The court's just not going to do it. They honestly, they can't do it. They don't have the personnel. They don't have the management. And, unless you have a lot of money to throw behind this, you probably don't really want to invest the money in that. I mean, if we're running to court because the kids aren't getting to their sporting events, well, the registration for the tournament was $100. How much did you pay your attorney to get the kid there? Is it worth it? Because now that tournament's $4,000. Now that soccer match is much more expensive. And so, the question becomes, as we're telling you these kinds of things, and as Brooke and I are explaining this to you, what do you do with that information? I think one of the listeners would probably say, well, I'm going to document everything and I'm going to keep track of it. Another listener might say, I'm going to gaslight the parent. I'm going to tell them, you didn't take them to this. You didn't take them to this. You didn't take them to this. And then another person might just say, I'm just not going to deal with it because, it's not on my time. And the reality is the family court wants to see you do more of the third option than any other option. And the reality is the family court isn't interested in coming in over the top of another parent and saying, hey, on your time, you absolutely have to make time for a 6 p.m. phone call. Hey, on your time, you absolutely have to make sure the kids get to every practice. Now, if your child is some, specialized athlete, if there's some established interest here in this sport and your child isn't the everyday athlete, maybe there's a different claim there. If your court order says something like telephone calls have to occur at 6 p.m., if they don't occur at 6 p.m., they have to be rescheduled within 12 hours. Maybe there's some claim there. But absent and apart from something very specific, you're not in the category of person where the family court is going to come in on the management level that you are going to find satisfying.
Yeah. So, this kind of rolls a lot into the whole parallel parenting concept that we utilize in our classes and with my clients when I'm coaching them. And that is really to take a long look at what's really important and how you're going to find an off-ramp from this rat wheel of conflict that you're involved with the other parent. And the things that you're talking about here, Kelli, are those items to me that are, to some people, really important, and in the big picture they really aren't. I got into a large conversation with my class last night about this very subject, about phone calls and about what's important and who is it important to. And I think the conflict is one piece. How do you get out of the conflict? The other piece is how do you extract this child from being caught in the middle of this conflict? And I think that is equally, if not more important than the former of the two. And, I didn't get a phone call with my child. I guarantee you, and you guys have heard me talk about this before, that child is not waiting at the other end of that phone for your phone call. They're involved with their life. They're doing their thing, and they're moving forward. And each time that phone call comes in, they have to stop what they're doing. You're intruding into the other parent's time, and you're putting the child in an uncomfortable position. And then the next thing is, well, I let the other parent do it. Well, that's great. You get out of the way. The child isn't in the middle of this, and they feel comfortable. And that's really the idea in all of this. And I think the same thing is true when we're talking about extracurriculars. Each one of our parents knows what the other person's pattern is and what they're going to do in terms of extracurriculars showing up or not showing up. And to just take that into consideration before you go running into the court, because as Kelli has said, they don't know, and frankly, they don't care about these types of things. They've got bigger fish to fry, and they have got a really small amount of resources to put to this. If, and you can check me on the timing of this, Kelli, but if somebody's going into court for any of these things, first of all, they're not actionable in terms of emergency hearings. A judge is going to say, go file an RFO. You're going to go file an RFO. It's going to cost you $1,000 to get the filing done, at least. And then you're going to wait for 3 months. And then you're going to wait for an FCS. And then you're going to wait for whatever comes after that. And to your point, that one item turned into $4,000 or more, and you still don't have resolution. And you've got 4 months of more conflict under your belt. So
I want to kind of break it up in terms of the pieces. One of the things that you just talked about is how to remove the child from the conflict. And I'm going to use your example about the phone calls. First of all, I always say to my clients specifically, but just in general, what you really need to know is there's no justice in family court. You're not going to go to family court and say, aha, I got him. It's really not going to happen. There are very, 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 very small occasions where you're going to get essentially what I would consider the biggest win of your life. But absent and apart from that, in the everyday little tiny feuds, there's no justice in family court. It's not like you're going there because, you have to take a step back and look at it as the family court is here to do one thing, and that's to look out for the best interests of your kid. The family court is not here to do what you want the family court to do, which is to punish the other parent for acting like a clown and not putting the kid's best interests at the forefront of every action that they have, right? And so you're going to always operate from the mindset of, I want the family court to do what? I want the family court to punish the other parent, admonish the other parent, sanction the other parent. That's where you're coming in. And if it's not you that thinks that way, it's potentially your co-parent. And the reality is the family court isn't seeking to be punitive to you. The family court isn't seeking to be punitive to the other parent. The family court is going to do whatever is directly in line with the best interests of your kiddo. And so, if you're running in there on a telephone schedule and you say, I'm not getting my telephone calls, and the other parent is saying, I facilitate them sometimes, the idea that you're even running in there about telephone calls signals to the family court that those telephone calls are more in that A, there's a lot of conflict there, but also B, that those telephone calls are much more important to you as the parent, and you're not concerned about what's the impact on my child on the other end of this.
Right.
I'm not getting my FaceTime. I'm not, etc. And you're exactly right, Brooke. That child is not waiting on the other end of the phone saying, I want. And in fact, I would even say to you that in my experiences, the cases where there is a time-stamped phone call, a 6 p.m. phone call, that, sometimes you get the parent who's in control of the kid having at that particular moment something largely exciting for the child to participate in. Dinner, a game, a walk, event at the park. Because why? Because they don't want the child to engage in that telephone call. And so again, the child has to stop what they're doing, get on the phone with you. It creates a lot more upset and a lot more disruption for your child than it's even worth. And so, if you're telling the family court, I'm not getting my phone calls, the family court, I think sometimes some of our judicial officers get caught in the idea that, these phone calls absolutely need to happen because I made an order. But at the end of the day, these phone calls very much are for the parent. They're not really for the children. And so, on that too, be mindful of what your kid is potentially doing when you're on these phone calls. Are you interrupting them having dinner? Are you interrupting them, with their normal bedtime routine? Are you keeping them on the phone for 2 hours because you want to be involved and insert yourself in their life at their other parent's home? Are you probing them for information that potentially is, very uncomfortable for them to share? Here's the issue. Whatever's going on behind the screen over here, you don't know. You don't know. Is the other parent sitting there controlling what the kid is saying to you? Is the other parent in the room lurking, making that child feel uncomfortable? It's not a good situation. The other piece of this is you talked about how do we extract the child from that, and I think that goes to kind of my initial point of there's no justice in family court and there's no fairness in family court, because your guys' perception on what is going to be fair is very different. One person thinks it's fair that the child participates in every single extracurricular activity under the sun. The other person thinks that it's fair that the child prioritizes downtime and schoolwork and friends and hanging out as the priority. And so you guys are not going to agree on what is quote unquote fair or best for your kid. And so the issue here is, how do you extract the child from, kind of that center? And in reality, I think what you have to take a look at is there are two obviously different households and obviously different styles of parenting that are potentially happening. And, on your time, you can do what you think is best. On the other parent's time, they can do what they think is best. And to put that on your kid and say, well, you didn't call me. I really missed you for our 6 p.m. phone call. I didn't get to talk to you. Those are all I statements. Those are all about you. They're not about your kid. And so I think that that's really the way that we extract the kid, is to think about, yeah, okay, maybe I facilitate the phone call when they're in my care, but I also know that in my care, the kid's comfortable. I know that I'm not lurking over the top of them wondering, what's being said. I'm not asking them when they get off the telephone, how come you said that? Why'd you say that? What about this? How come you didn't tell them all the other fun things we did? And the reality is, again, if there's no fairness in family court, there's no sense in you saying, well, I did it, so they should do it. That should just be completely erased from your vocabulary. Because again, you're in a situation where you're co-parenting a kid because you guys obviously have two very different ideas and approaches to fundamental things.
Yeah, and the piece that you're speaking to in terms of telling the kid, I missed you, I didn't get to see you, I didn't have that phone call, is a subtle message to the child, that I'm not okay without you. And it begins to parentify the child. It begins to make the child worry about if you're okay when they're not there. And by eliminating that phone call, by going to the other parent and saying, or not the other parent, but going to the child and saying, listen, sweetheart, I love you. And I look forward to seeing you on every opportunity that you are with me. And I know that you're going to be there, and we're going to do the things that we've talked about. In the meantime, I'm not going to call. I'm going to just release you from that, because I know that it's uncomfortable. I'm pulling you away from things that you want to be doing, and that's not a comfortable moment. But know that because I'm not calling doesn't mean that I'm not thinking of you and that I don't love you. So let's make that establishment and then move that forward from there. And here's a piece that I want you to talk to, that I find come up frequently with my clients. And you were talking about extracurricular activities. Mm-hmm. And you actually brought in this notion that one parent wants that child into every activity that they can be into. And they may have some delusion that that child is going to go to college on a scholarship and play in the pros. And the truth of the matter is the percentages of that happening are very, very low. And if the child is enjoying it, that's awesome. However, I'll have a parent unilaterally front load the child into as much of a sport or multiple sports as they can. They'll come in and they'll coach, and they'll try to take over a parent's time with practices and ancillary things, activities that are around that really extract that child from that parent's parenting time. And it creates a huge psychological burden on the child, especially if they're not into that kind of pressure, which many of these kids aren't. They're, the parents are living vicariously through their children and trying to get them in a place that they couldn't get to, if you would. So this is a place where the family court isn't a management tool, but there's got to be something in this programming at some point to be able to create a different pattern for this child. And
So,
oftentimes that's through the court system, is it not?
well, it honestly in this circumstance is going to be very kid dependent. If you have a child who's been a soccer player since they were 3, and all while you guys were together, this child participated in every soccer tournament and was a soccer star and was doing really well. And then all of a sudden, after the separation, after there's 2 households, one parent drops off on the soccer participation, when clearly the child is still very much enjoying it, then you're going to have a very different scenario versus the person who says, I want my 11-year-old to play soccer now for the first time ever. And I want them in every soccer match, every soccer tournament, every soccer, everything. Oh, and by the way, this is a traveling soccer team. Oh, but don't worry, if you have to work on the weekend or you can't take them, I'm available. So thereby they get to basically usurp your weekends. Okay. Here's kind of the way to handle that.
There's an in-between piece of this that I want to bring into the conversation while you're with that, Kelly, though. We may have a child, and I'm thinking of one situation that I'm working with particularly right now where one of the parents has got the child just deep into a sport and tries to do it year round. And this child has done this all along, but the child isn't proficient. The child sits on the bench a lot. The child, when they're with the parent that is not pushing this, actually relaxes and enjoys their time, but is afraid to express that due to the ramifications of having to hear the pressure from the parent who is pushing all of this. Mm-hmm. So this is one of those in-between places that I think gets tricky, and it's more frequent than some people might even imagine.
Sure. And I don't disagree with you, but I don't think you're going to like my answer.
That's good. That's why we're having the conversation, Kelly.
I don't disagree with you that there are potentially 2 levels of parents in terms of what's going to be, encouraged, what's not. This is back where it goes back to, if one parent is pushing this activity that the kids are just kind of, maybe they've fallen out of the sport. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe all their friends got better at it and they're not doing so hot. And so they're riding the bench the whole time. This is one of those times when I think that the parent could absolutely support the child and say, if you don't want to do it when you're at my house, we won't do it. If you want to do it, we'll do it. And I think that, you have to kind of take a step back and as a standalone decision, ask yourself, if parent number 2 wasn't involved, if they weren't here, if they didn't exist, would this kid today be playing this sport? Would I think that this kid would be playing the sport? Would I be encouraging this kid to participate? And, if the answer is yes, then that's the frame of mind that you should do it in. That's the frame of mind that you should be making that decision. If the answer is no, that's the frame of mind you should be making the decision. In other words, do not ever come from a place of, well, I'm mad that your other parent is not listening to your wishes, not allowing you to, settle for what you want to settle for. And they're forcing this agenda. So I'm going to take a stance against that. I think you have to be very cautious. And this is not an easy thing to do. It's really not. You have to step outside of kind of the box in which you live and say, what's the right decision today? And, ultimately, it's going to be a family by family basis. But I really think one of the, I think that sometimes parents get fueled thinking that, some parents or some co-parents enroll the kid in these activities to monopolize the kid's time. And that might be true. But the other reality is, the kid on your time doesn't have to participate in every soccer tournament, every baseball tournament, every lacrosse tournament. They just don't have to. I don't think that you should be the parents unless your child is old enough to make that disclosure on their own. I don't think you should ever be the parent that says, I'm never going to a soccer game. I'm never taking him to soccer practice. I'm never supporting him. But I think this is one of those times where you have to use some reasonable communication and say, our child does not feel like he wants to do X, Y, and Z. And, because of that decision, I'm going to allow him to skip soccer this week. Next week, maybe we'll try again. Or maybe the answer is the same.
So surprisingly enough, you and I are on the same page.
Oh, good. We are on the same page.
Yeah, we usually are. And I think the only variable in that piece that is important, and I want to come back into the court conversation with this in a minute, is when a child will use the words of the parent that wants them to play the sport because they don't want to face the wrath of that parent when they're with them. And so their narrative is I want to play, I want to play, I want to play. You're keeping me from playing. And when you really look at the affect of that child when they're there, it's like, God, I don't want to go to batting practice. I don't want to go to soccer practice. I've had too much. I just want to rest. My plate is too full. And then when you look at their curricular activities, their school activities, and you combine all of these hours, the stress on this child's physiology is obvious. And where in that conversation, Kelli, if there is a place, does the court become a part of the conversation?
I think if you have a parent who is if you have facts, if you have actual substantive evidence that shows there is a correlation between our child is so stressed out doing, I'm going to use baseball, doing baseball, that, dad has him at batting practice, or, mom has him at personal training with a trainer 5 times a week, and his extracurricular activities are suffering, I think there could potentially be room for argument with the court. But the reality becomes, if this child is so trained on saying, I want to play, I want to play, I want to play, you're preventing me from playing, you're not going to win that. You're not going to win that argument with the child.
Right.
And you have to take a step back from, this is where family court is not your remedy. This is where you just have to be a parent and realize that if your kid is saying, you're preventing me from doing X, then you've already long lost that battle, and you need to support the kid in doing X until the child says, okay, wait, never mind. This wasn't a good idea. That's kind of the reality. It's not a family court remedy. Now, if you show me a child who documented evidence of this child being so maxed out because he's doing 3 hours of, doing 3 hours of practice every day, the academics are suffering, it's personal training, it's private lessons, it's, batting practice, it's whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then you show me, and he's failing X, Y, and Z, then your first remedy isn't the family court. Your first remedy is your co-parent and your communication. Hey, our child is failing 6 out of 7 classes. So my remedy over here is going to be that there's going to be less baseball so we can focus on more study. And we're going to treat baseball as a reward over here. You want to go to baseball, you better have the grades to do it. That's your first remedy. Why? Because the family court wants to see that you've taken the effort to do something and communicate with that other person of, hey, this is a problem. If you're lacking that communication piece, you could tell me straight in the face that this communication is not going to be effective, that I've tried it 100 times, and I'm going to tell you to try it 101. Because that's your remedy. I also think that, we get to a point where, I ask my clients, frankly, sometimes, if you can tell, I'm a little bit abrasive, but I'll ask my clients sometimes, what do you think I'm going to do about it? And that response usually comes when, I'm on the receiving end of a complaint about, I'm being told by my kid that I'm not letting him participate in X, Y, and Z, and there's no legal remedy. So my response is, what am I going to do about it? Because it sometimes becomes a dynamic between the parent and the child. And it becomes more that dynamic that you sometimes have to approach from a different angle. And it's not family court's my remedy. It's not go to Kelli, she can fix the problem. The other factor in this is, let's say we have client X, and client X comes to us with child Y, and child Y is failing all of the classes, and client X says it's because child Y is doing 15 hours of baseball every week. If not for baseball, child Y would be a stellar performer at school, would have all this diverse whatever. We go to court, we plead that to the family court judge. If child Y is old enough, child Y may be interviewed by FCS. And if FCS hears from child Y, my mom doesn't let me participate, how do you think that's going to go for you? If family court services hears from child Y, I love baseball, I'll do anything to stay in baseball, how do you think that your comments trying to draw that connection are going to land with family court and ergo your judge? The other factor is, now we have your co-parent Z, who brings in all this rebuttal evidence of, whoa. It's not that the child is failing academics because he's in baseball. The child's failing academics because here's his Xbox Live profile where he's logged in until 2 a.m. at mom's house. He wants to be at mom's house because he's on Xbox till 2 a.m. He doesn't want to do baseball because he doesn't want to let go of the other, instant gratification pleasures that we enjoy on day-to-day life. And so sometimes, and I'm not saying that this is the case in the specific fact pattern you were discussing, but sometimes there isn't a legal remedy. And I'm going to look at you and say, what do you think I'm going to do about that?
So what would you say to our listeners here today, Kelli, in terms of how to get their heads straight before they go diving in?
Well, are you talking about just specifically on extracurriculars? Or are you talking about more broad? What do you mean?
I'm talking about just cases in the broad sense. So we are going to look at any client, either early in the beginning or talking about going back on an issue that is unresolved, and they have got to get their head in alignment of reasonable expectations about what is going to occur and pathways to narratives that are going to give them better chances at the outcomes that they're looking for.
So I really think that, everything in law is a chess game. And, in order to be a good chess player, you really have to be rehearsed in all the different moves that you can make. And in order to understand all the moves that you can make, you really need to be working with somebody who knows what moves you can make. Certainly, you're not the average client isn't going to be the family court professional. They're not going to understand necessarily the ins and outs of family court or how a fact might land, right? And so you really need to be working with somebody, be it a family law attorney, which is obviously very expensive, or a coach that helps you with co-parenting. That's going to be your less expensive route, but equally effective route. So I really think that, all of this kind of overarching lesson isn't to say, at the beginning of this, I said, you have 3 options. And the third option was kind of do nothing, right? And it's not to say that you shouldn't do anything. You should document this. You should keep track of it, because someday, if your kid wants to be that pro baseball player and now the shoe is reversed and, the other parent isn't supporting the activity, you're going to want the history where you can show that you always supported the activity, right? You're going to want the history showing that the other parent didn't support the activity. And similarly, if your kid doesn't want to be the pro baseball player, you're going to want the history showing you've supported the kid's wishes, you've supported the kid academically, you're supporting kind of this organic growth, and the other parent was the one constantly always driving the obligation. And so it's not to say don't document. It's not to say don't have conversations with your attorney or a co-parenting coach to help you navigate what your next steps are. by all means, you should do that. You just don't necessarily want to run into court expecting that the court is going to give you an outcome on everything. The other reality is, let's take our baseball scenario again. And let's talk about, let's say you do run into court and the child's been so coached to say, I really want to participate, and one parent isn't allowing me to. What if the family court hears that and says, oh, well, one parent doesn't want to allow? Well, guess what? Now, every time there's a game, if you can't take them to the game, you're going to forfeit your time to the other parent. Is that the common order? No, but if the court sees a, long line of obstruction, I think you could potentially get that as an order. And so, family court can obviously backfire in what you're trying to do. And so you really have to be having these conversations at every step of the way. Obviously, to keep a family law attorney constantly in the background, constantly on retainer, is going to be very expensive. But if you have some sort of co-parenting coach that's helping you navigate this, that knows the right things to listen for, and that's a little bit cheaper than a family law attorney, that's obviously going to be your best bet.
And I'm guessing from your standpoint, Kelli, when you've got somebody that's got that piece going on, when they do come to you, it's much easier for you to guide them and get them into the places that you need to do in an efficient manner.
Exactly. It also ensures that they haven't made a ton of missteps along the way that I can't correct. It ensures that somebody told them much before me that instead of stopping all of this baseball and all of this activities and all of these practices, that you've communicated, hey, by the way, their grades are not such that, they're performing at the level that should be satisfactory. Therefore, we should be making some adjustments to this baseball schedule. It's ensuring that somebody puts those stops in place and kind of make sure that you do those things. Vice you coming to me and you stopped baseball 6 months ago, and I say, well, did you communicate? And you say, communicate? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. So it closes the gap on time frame if you have somebody in real time who can kind of explain things to you, help you along the way.
I think it's so important that, everybody understand that most of the things that they're wrapped up in are reactive, that they don't think through the long game of this. They are in that moment of, I want this to change because it's uncomfortable, or I want it because I want it. And, that this is really, it's a long game. It's a long journey for these parents to get to the end of this. And you and I talked a little bit before this podcast about how long that journey is. And, I think you said it was something like, at least 20 years. And I think that the journey goes far beyond that. If we're going to have a good relationship with our children, we have to be able to plug these pieces in so they can sit down and they know that every place along their journey in life that parent's been there and that they've got their back and they're keeping them steady. And the conflict doesn't do that.
And I agree with that 100%. Sometimes, unfortunately, it takes years before two people can step into a room and really come to the same table and have a conversation and have a dialogue and kind of a meeting of the minds. And maybe that doesn't happen until after your kids are in their teens, or maybe it doesn't happen for 10 years after you guys separated. But at some point, the goal is to get to a space where, you can say, listen, I don't agree with all the things you did. I don't, feel like everything that you did to me was appropriate or was fair, or that you always acted with best interests. But you need to be able to get to a place with yourself that when you're stepping into the room with that other person, that's not the topic that you're talking about, that you're not even there to have that conversation with them, because that's, again, you seeking to kind of get closure in your own life and seek to get some validation that, you weren't crazy, that this person really did act a certain way during your co-parenting relationship. And again, you're making it about you. You're not making it about what's our kid doing. Let's imagine a scenario where your kid's getting married. Are you really going to show up and your co-parents there? And, maybe your kid's gotten married 10 years after the family court lost jurisdiction over them. And are you really going to show up and your intention in that day is to, go right up to that other parent and explain to them just exactly how you felt and just exactly why you were so mad? I mean, is that really your intention? And, it takes a lot to get to that point, but until you can get to that point, your co-parenting relationship is going to be riddled with conflict. It just is. And, unfortunately, it's a two-way street, and you sometimes are having to wait for time to pass to resolve for the other person to be able to get there. Because of course, if you get there, that's great. But unfortunately, you can't get there by yourself. And so you have to wait until that other person has time.
I'm going to take just a moment there and beg to differ just a bit, because if you get there, that's your journey and that's great, and you've let the stuff go, and whether the other parent ever gets there or not is kind of irrelevant. There's the relationship that you've created as a parent with your child. Optimally, we want to be able to find that middle ground with the co-parent, if you will, but we also know that there are pathologies out there, if you will. There are personalities and personality types out there that are never going to get there. So to be able just to kind of hang and go, I can let this go, I can move on, I can take whatever comes in my way, like a duck, that's great. And I think
Well, and
that's
again,
often what happens.
right. And again, I don't necessarily know that I'm conveying that you aren't going to get to a point on your own. You'll certainly get there. But whether or not that other person, again, using the wedding as a scenario, whether or not that other person can come to that wedding without the intentions of, seeking you out and having that conflict,
Yep.
is what I'm saying is a two-way street. Because in order to be able to show up on that event and both just be there to support the child is going to be a two-way street, because that other parent has to be coming to the table with the idea that they're coming there for the reason of the child, and not with the idea that they're coming there to somehow validate themselves for the last 20 years or get closure on something that they feel like they never got closure on. That's the part where it's a two-way street. I don't necessarily think your actions are ever going to bring that other parent to the table before they're ready to come on their own. Period.
For sure. So is there anything here, Kelli, that you want to bring in as a notion of what you would consider to be actionable for our parents that makes sense for them to make that movement to try to get to court to be a management tool for their situation?
I think it just really comes down to it being a every day-to-day family law case basis. You'd have to come at me with a fact pattern and tell me I have all these things that supports it. It's not to say that family law isn't going to help you or the judicial system isn't going to help you. It's more to just highlight that, you're paying a lot to be there, and you're paying a lot to be there to fight over things that you want the other person to do for a couple reasons. Because the court ordered it and you think they should have to follow it, because you do it and you think they should have to follow it, or because you just have some vendetta and want to keep the conflict going. And those are your three reasons. And I mean, there are cases obviously where, kids suffering academically, baseball's coming over the top, there are those cases. But if your attorney isn't stopping you to say, okay, hold the bus, let's talk this through. You're going to make these claims. What claims are going to be made on the other side of it? What's the other parent's perspective? And sometimes, if your attorney is not having that conversation with you, then they're really doing you a disservice. They need to be having that conversation with you, because if they're not, they're finding out facts on the spot. And if you're finding out facts on the spot, or you're finding out facts after you've already filed, you've potentially already rung a bell that you can't unring. And so that becomes the problem. So it's not to say that you should never run into family court, but it's just to say that family court kind of can go any which way. And if they present a case that shows that you're just notoriously unwilling to support the child in their athletics, you're notoriously unwilling to, make trades on days that the child has athletics, and you're saying, no, I'm not gonna cooperate. That's not necessarily gonna look great on you. The other factor of all of this is education is really important to attorneys, right? It's really important to judges who were former attorneys. The other thing that's really important to us is extracurricular activities. You're always going to run into a judge who thinks that extracurricular activities are fantastic, because you didn't become a judge. You didn't become an attorney without having a dynamic skill set and the ability to kind of multitask and do a lot of different stuff at once. And so you're going to run into people who, really are pro those types of activities. Now, does that mean that it overrides, the grades? Does it mean that it overrides, sleep deprivation? Does it mean that it overrides health concerns? No, but you have to know your audience going into it. And we're always going to be pro education, pro athletics, pro extracurriculars, pro a well-rounded kid.
All right. Well, thank you for coming and joining this again, Kelli. I always look forward to it. It has been know that the family court isn't a management tool. And we'll see you again next week. Kelli, you want to put anything out here as we end up to tell people how they can get in touch with you if they wish to do so?
If you search my name, or if you ask Brook for a referral, he will allow you a referral code at which you could contact me with, or he will give you my direct information, which you could contact me with, and we can go from there.
Awesome. Thank you again very much, Kelli.
Thank you so much.
Brook, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or recorded anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. They go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brook has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brook@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brook.